These are some of statements that we've read from some of the best historians and archaeologists that have taken time to study the evidence, to dig. This is what they say. Those who may not know this guy, a lot of people quote him, William Albright. He says, as a whole, the picture in Genesis is historical, and there is no reason to doubt the general accuracy of the biographical details. This is how he's coming to the text. He's an archaeologist. Roland de Vaux, a biblical scholar and archaeologist, says, if the historical faith of Israel is not founded in history, such faith is erroneous. And therefore, our faith is also. Many of the early biblical archaeologists had been trained as clerics or theologians. What happened was that they were persuaded by their faith that God's promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was real. By the way, we should rearrange that order. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. It should be Jacob, Abraham, and Isaac. We would get there. When you take the Bible narrative, it's the earliest story of Israel. That's what the Torah gives us. And it's in a sequential order. What is that order? The Bible narrates the earliest history of Israel in this order. From the patriarchs to Egypt, to the Exodus, to the wandering in the desert, to the conquest of Canaan, to the period of the judges, to the establishment of the monarchy. This is how it is presented to us. Not only does it provide these in sequential order, it also provides a key to calculating specific dates. We like dates. We like the mention of historical figures because it gives us a point to trace what we want to trace. In 1 Kings 6, we read, in the 480th year from the Israelites, after the Israelites left the land of Egypt, in the month of Ziz, that is the second month, in the 4th year of his reign over Israel, Solomon began to build the house of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. In the 480th year after the Israelites left the land of Egypt, we are told that in the month of Ziz, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, he began to build the house of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. Well, we have dates. So with this, we are told that the Exodus took place 480 years before the construction of the temple began in Jerusalem. Awesome. This was in the 4th year of the reign of Solomon. So with this date, we can even calculate Abraham's original departure for Canaan. It brings us to 2100 BCE. Look at our archaeological periods chart. 2100 BCE. Because we have a date. And we can use the date to get some pretty close dates and times of a lot of people in the text. But is this history? Can archaeology help us pinpoint the era when a leader named Moses mobilized his people for the great act of liberation? Can we trace the path of the Exodus and the wandering in the wilderness? Can we trace it? Can we even determine if the Exodus, as described in the biblical text, ever occurred? There has been 200 years of intense excavation to provide a reliable historical background to the great epic of the Israelites' escape from Egypt and their receiving of the Torah. Can archaeology prove this? Can history prove this? I mean, the Exodus narrative is filled with a wealth of detailed and specific geographical references. A wealth of them. Can they provide a reliable historical background to this great epic? That is what we're going to find out. That is my job today, to provide you with the historical records to prove the Exodus. Let me give it a shot. Just as the biblical narrative describes the Exodus, or what happened, there is good reason to believe that in times of famine in the land of Canaan, which, don't forget, was a province of Egypt, pastoralists and farmers would go to Egypt to settle in the eastern delta and enjoy its dependable fertility. We know this. Actually, we have this evidence. This tomb painting from Middle Egypt. That will be from the 19th century BCE. It portrays a group of Transjordans coming down to Egypt with animal and goods. They are coming in as traders, not conscripted laborers. This is what this painting is depicting. Okay. Other Canaanites in the Delta may have been brought there by the armies of the pharaohs as prisoners of war. They may have been taken in corrective campaigns against the rebellious city-states of Canaan. You should understand that coming from last week's class. We saw how these petty kings were telling on each other, and they would ask for a unit from Egypt to come and pacify what was going on. So some of these Canaanites that were in the Delta, not all of them would have just migrated because of change of climate. Some of them would have been prisoners of war. We do know that some were assigned as slaves to cultivate lands of temple estates. Some found their way up the social ladder and eventually became government officials, soldiers, and some even priests. Now, Asiatics immigrating to Egypt to be conscripted laborers, forced to work in the Delta, are not restricted to the Bronze Age. They just reflect the age-old rhythms in the region, including latter centuries in the Iron Age. You can see the timelines on the screen. We see this in latter centuries in the Iron Age, closer to the time when the Exodus narrative was put in writing. And like I said, some of these people, some of these Asiatic people, found their way up the social ladder and eventually became government officials, soldiers, priests, just as the tale of Joseph in the biblical text. We have an Egyptian historian called Manetho. He based an account on unnamed sacred books and popular tales and legends. And Manetho recorded an extraordinary immigrant success story. What does Manetho tell us? Manetho described a massive, brutal invasion of Egypt by foreigners from the east. They are called rulers of foreign lands, what we've come to know as Hyksos. Manetho tells us that these rulers of foreign lands established themselves in the Delta at a city named Avaris, and they founded a dynasty there. And that dynasty ruled Egypt with great cruelty for more than 500 years. This is what Manetho tells us. Well, what do we know today with modern research and recent archaeological excavations in the Eastern Nile Delta. What do we know? In the early years of modern research, scholars identified the Hyksos with the kings of the 15th dynasty of Egypt. So they're ruling from 1670 to 1570. Let me fix this. So from 1670 to 1570. So these rulers of foreign lands, Hyksos, they are identified with the kings of the 15th dynasty of Egypt. Inscriptions and seals that were found bearing the names of Hyksos rulers tell us that they were West Semitic. In other words, they were Canaanite. And the evidence that we have, which is archaeological excavations in the Eastern Delta, on the Eastern Nile Delta, confirms that these were West Semitic and they were, in other words, Canaanite. The evidence that we have as well disagrees with Manetho. The invasion of the Hyksos, according to what archaeology tells us, was a gradual process of immigration from Canaan to Egypt rather than a lightning military campaign. So it was not that of a conquest. It was not what Manetho tells us, that they came from afar to invade and conquer Egypt. So why is Manetho saying that? The most important dig in Avaris, the capital city of the Hyksos, or rulers of foreign lands, as I like calling them, is by this professor, Manfred Beitek. What did he find? What did his group find when they did the excavation? Let's present it. Excavations there in Avaris show a gradual increase of Canaanite influence in the styles of pottery, architecture, and tombs from around the 1800 BCE. Some 150 years later, by the time of the 15th dynasty, the culture of the site, which eventually became a huge city, was overwhelmingly Canaanite. So these finds are evidence for a long and gradual development of Canaanite presence in the Delta. It tells us of a peaceful takeover of power, not what Manetho reports. Actually, the biblical text tells us that the patriarchs visited Egypt and settled there. The archaeological data supports the biblical account in this case. So why is Manetho telling us something that the evidence does not support? Manetho is writing almost 1500 years later and he describes a brutal invasion rather than a gradual, peaceful immigration. We have to understand this, why he does this, on the background of his own times. Very important, this statement. It will help us where we are going. Manetho is writing when memories of the invasions of Egypt by the Assyrians, Babylonians, and Persians in the 6th and 7th century, or the other way around, the 7th and 6th century BCE, were still painfully fresh in the Egyptian consciousness. So he's writing what he's feeling. He's writing memories of the invasions of Egypt by the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians in the 7th and 6th century. And he's writing from that background, telling us that this was the same thing that happened with the Hyksos, which the evidence doesn't bear him out. So we have to correct Manetho's historical account about these people and how they got into Egypt. Around the middle of the 16th century BCE, the capital of the Hyksos was abandoned, marking the southern end of the Canaanite influence there. From Egyptian sources from this time, the 16th century BCE, that recounts the exploit of Pharaoh Amos of the 18th dynasty, tells us that he sacked Avaris and chased the remnants of the Hyksos to their main citadel in southern Canaan, somewhere near Gaza, which he stormed after a long siege. This is what the Egyptian records tell us. Manetho tells us almost the same, but Manetho suggests that after the Hyksos were driven from Egypt, they founded a city of Jerusalem, or the city of Jerusalem, and constructed the temple there, according to Manetho. What we have so far is that independent archaeological and historical sources tell of migrations of Semites from Canaan to Egypt and of Egyptians forcibly expelling them. This outline of immigration and violent return to Canaan, they immigrated there and they were violently removed. So this outline of immigration and violent return to Canaan is parallel to the biblical account of the Exodus. It sounds like the biblical account of the Exodus here in history, proven to us. Is that not true? The Bible tells us of the patriarchs coming to Egypt. They settled there, and then they were kicked out, or they ran out, went to the land of Canaan, took it over. I believe I've just presented the Hyksos coming in to Canaan, ruling there, as the biblical narrative said. They were the elite. And then, because when everybody was suffering, they were not suffering. They were getting rations from Joseph. They were enjoying stuff. And then they were kind of kicked out, chased out. The Hyksos proves the Exodus. Would you agree with me?
Rabbi.
Mr. Mark.
Yes. So far, based on what you presented, I would say that it certainly proves an exodus. I can't say for sure it proves the exodus, quote unquote, as described in the Bible.
Awesome. Very good.
So, Rabbi, exactly what does this mean then? I feel like right now I'm on the verge of being offended, but I'm not gonna be offended because I'm better than that. But it looks like another story has been appropriated for our text to give it more substance or something like that. Substance.
Correct. I do understand where you're coming from. You see, I will be dishonest if I stopped here like most would do and say, see, this proves the Exodus. Brutally dishonest. I am approaching the text from the outside. I'm not approaching it with dogma. I'm not approaching it believing in the Exodus and trying to prove it. No. I'm approaching it from the stance that give me the data, let me examine the data, and then come to my conclusions. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm not looking for that aha moment to say this proves the Exodus. No, I want all the data. So if I stop here and I say this proves it, I'm being very dishonest. So we've seen the Hyksos. We've seen what time they came. We know when they were expelled. We started by giving a date. I read it again. In the 480 years after the Israelites left the land of Egypt, in the month of Ziz, that is the second month, in the 4th year of the reign over Israel, or of his reign over Israel, Solomon began to build the house of Yudevavhe. So, the Exodus took place 480 years before the construction of the temple began in Jerusalem. We have this data. It's taking place in the 4th year of the reign of Solomon. So, according to a correlation of the reigns of Israelite kings with outside Egyptian and Assyrian sources, this would roughly place the Exodus in 1440 BCE. Look at that carefully. We already have a problem. What is the issue? The Hyksos, rulers of foreign land, the expulsion is dated around 1570 BCE. The Exodus, per the date of the biblical account itself, gives us 1440 BCE. It means that we have 100 years after the Hyksos are expelled, before the biblical Exodus. This is why I said I'll be dishonest if I don't continue with my findings. 1570. That is when they were expelled. You're looking at the Middle Bronze Age. The Exodus, according to the biblical text, is happening in the late Bronze Age. That's 100 years before the Exodus, the biblical Exodus. The Hyksos were expelled. That's when the expulsion happened. Let's pick up more data.